Hello, and today we have a very special visit that we want to share with you, as we had the very exciting and interesting privilege to walk through some various departments of Patek Philippe, where we will talk, illustrate and partly uncover the notion of finishing in such an important brand. To do so, we met with Mr. Daniel Jacquet, a man who joined the company in the early 60s and now retired, and has seen and lived from the inside the incredible evolution of Patek Philippe, and was therefore the perfect guide for us for this very interesting walkthrough. He took us on various production sites showcasing different types and levels of finishing depending on the types of watches and which part of the watch we are talking about: cases, bracelets, components and naturally movements. So firstly, we went to a department focused on case finishing and got to see how they proceed on what are called montres d'officier, meaning officer watches, whose particularity is that you can open the case back with a kind of a lid feature, or hinge case back to be more precise, which then lets you see the movement through a regular sapphire glass. Here the particularity, or should I say the main goal, is that you want to have this movable back protection blend perfectly with the other main part of the case and ultimately almost not see the juncture between the two. This requires perfect machining of the base elements naturally, but you still need to adjust and polish by hand these parts to attain this almost invisible objective. But of course it doesn't stop here, as this hinge feature itself also needs to be meticulously adjusted. You don't want to see the hinges, and they have to be put in place in a very meticulous way. You want the action of moving this back case to be as smooth as possible. It must feel comfortable, not too stiff or not too loose either. And finally, and this is very important, you want to have this special just right feeling when you open and close this case back, not having to push too much and not ripping your nail while opening it. Those are all minute details, but this is what will make the customer experience unique. Think about it like when you open and close the door of a nice German luxury car. You know that sensation of smoothness, comfort and that little sound of perfection. Well, here it's a bit of the same story, of course a bit less robots involved, because here it's really the dexterity and the experience of the craftsman that will achieve this result. It just takes time. Okay, so let's move on, and Mr. Jacquet now took us to another atelier where they assemble and finish bracelets, and as you can see there are quite a lot of people involved in this process. Metal bracelets can be made of a very large number of parts, and they are a real puzzle of ingenuity that you don't necessarily grasp when you look at them, and for a purpose they just need to be beautiful and precisely hide or sublime this intricacy. Design considerations have an impact on this number of parts. For instance, the width of your bracelet can so slightly change, and to keep an overall harmony, well, these parts will all vary from one another and you then need to assemble them in a sequence manner. But the finishing of these different parts can also vary on the same bracelet. Think of the Nautilus bracelet with its brushed and polished parts, a clear and distinct element of the watch's design. Well, to achieve this, there is a special order to respect, and for instance, for the polished parts, well, you can't do them beforehand and then assemble them. No, the bracelet needs to be fully assembled, well protected, and only then can you focus on making these parts shine. And the reason to do it like this is that there would be a much too greater risk of damaging these components, for instance just scratching them, if you did that assembly on a later stage. Each type of material used will also involve different techniques and tools, whether you are working on steel, gold or platinum. But now let's go to a different department where practically all is done by hand, and you guessed it, this is the haute horlogerie department, working on the super high-end timepieces and complications of Patek, such as minute repeaters, tourbillons, well, the very top of mechanical watchmaking art. Obviously, there are a bit less people here, but you have to consider that this department is almost like a self-sufficient entity, as they have all the necessary tooling and skills to produce all the components required for these watches. The finishing of each component is fully done by hand, and in the example we got to witness, the watchmaker was telling us that he could spend a full day just finishing one specific component, and that sometimes for the same component it can take less, but ultimately the goal is perfection, and time to get there is therefore a variable. I like this attitude. Now that we've talked a bit more about movements, well, let's go to another building, and this is a pretty impressive operation where they mainly work on movement components manufacturing. But this also implies the finishing performed on some gear trains and other components, and there are some really small ones. Finishing is not only done for aesthetic reasons, but also very importantly for the proper running of your watch's movement, since it has an impact, a direct impact on its chronometric performance. So for the final atelier we got to visit, this was in a certain way a bit more classical for us, as this is where a rather large team of people are working on the final decoration on some movements. For instance, with the perlage, angling and polishing, as well as the addition of the famous Geneva stripe motif. Well, this was a pretty long visit for us, but such an interesting one, and though I have already been a few times by Patek Philippe, I must admit that it was the first time I went so deep into the brand's full technical operations, and I have to say that I was really impressed. It's pretty big, it's super well organized, and you could definitely grasp the level of seriousness in these walls and how Patek Philippe developed its know-how and expertise, enabling them to produce today's number of timepieces, and at the same time remain in a league of their own. So I would really like to thank Mr. Jacquet and the time he spent with us, and naturally all the precious and super interesting things he shared with me, because it's really those kind of human encounter that really makes my day. I hope you enjoyed this visit, and we were happy to take you along, so best to you and see you real soon.